Over 700 hospital beds have been closed since Friday when thousands of nurses voted to take industrial action. Conciliation has been scheduled for every day this week, but today the employer body, the Victorian Hospitals Industrial Association, is applying to Fair Work Australia in an attempt to end the nurses' work bans. On the line is the Victorian Branch Secretary of the Australian Nursing Federation, Lisa Fitzpatrick. Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning, Lawrence.
Now, 700 beds sounds, well, serious in anyone's language, but you have exemptions in place for many patients. Who is exempt?
We have 11 exemptions in total. Patients such as neonatal paediatric patients, haemodialysis patients, oncology patients, all maternity patients, palliative care patients, intensive care, coronary care, high dependency unit, as well as the Royal Children's Hospital in its entirety and Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre. I think it's quite critical, Lawrence, to get a breakdown of those 700 beds. 107 of those beds are beds that have been closed in our system for a long time because of shortage of funding for hospitals. So
okay,
and government-closed beds.
So that leaves 593.
300 of our beds that are closed for, and so that we can take emergency admissions into our wards as quick as they are needed by the emergency department, so that people don't stay for days in our emergency departments like they do when we're not taking action.
So just on emergency patients, as a result of these work bans, are emergency patients going to be turned away from hospitals? Are there going to be longer waiting times for emergency patients? Will it affect critical care?
No, those patients who require an emergency bed, there are 300 beds. I would think less now because some patients will have been admitted overnight. But as it's sort of 4 o'clock yesterday, there were 300 beds available, closed, but ready to be opened the minute an emergency patient was required to be transferred from the emergency department to a hospital.
The Victorian Hospitals Industrial Association is going to apply to Fair Work Australia today to stop the work bans. What happens then? You go into conciliation for a mandatory period of 21 days, is that right?
We are already in conciliation. We started conciliation on Wednesday last week.
Yep.
Despite the government opposing that conciliation, the Commission ruled in our favour and the government had to come to the table, and we had negotiations on Thursday and Friday and all day Saturday. We will be asking Fair Work Australia, this is a separate proceeding that is being applied for today, but we will be asking Fair Work Australia in that proceeding to draw a distinction between the everyday failures of our public health system rather than accept an argument from the government that our protected action is in any way responsible for them.
Would you prefer Fair Work Australia, rather than to go through this whole rigmarole of work bans and being brought to the table, to just bring a decision down so the umpire's decision is final and we can all move on?
The difficulty for that in an arbitration case is that it has been ruled by the High Court that Fair Work Australia cannot determine our nurse-patient ratios, the fact that we require qualified, registered and enrolled nurses and midwives in our health system, not the numbers, which is our nurse-patient ratios, and certainly we would not have any protection for our shifts, and we would end up with short shifts and split shifts, which is what we're very much trying to avoid. So Fair Work Australia in an arbitration case is rigged for the nurses because it legally cannot determine many of the major things that we have are in dispute about. What Fair Work Australia is doing now in separate proceedings is conciliating, so mediating between the parties and trying to reach agreement through negotiations. And we are continuing with those proceedings. Today at 10 a.m. we have scheduled meetings in Fair Work Australia all day today, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday and Friday. So there are there are two proceedings now happening at Fair Work. One is the negotiation ones, which we started last week, and the second one is the one that the government and VHIA are bringing on today, which is to stop the action. And what we're asking of the Baillieu government is fix the dispute.
Now, the Baillieu government, let me ask you this, Lisa. The Baillieu government made a promise to basically make nurses on parity with their interstate partners. They've only been in power for a year. Have you given them enough time to get around to this?
No, they never made us an election commitment about wages. What they promised us is that they would maintain our nurse-patient ratios in their current format and as supported in current agreements. And if you listen to what the Minister was saying last week, he says that the election commitment they gave was to maintain nurse-patient ratios but with flexibility. I have the words right in front of me of what the Minister wrote down and sent to us in writing, and he has not kept that promise. In addition, he promised that he would work constructively with the ANF in negotiating the next EBA in 2011, which is this one. These are pre-election commitments that the Baillieu opposition gave us. And the expose in the Age, Sunday Age, about their secret cabinet document has demonstrated that that election commitment has been broken because right back in May this year, the government were already determined that they were going to force us to arbitration so that we could not have our nurse-patient ratios.
And is that why you've gone a year into the Baillieu government rather than letting this run the whole first term? You got the impression that they were going to break the deal?
Our enterprise agreement expired on the 1st of November this year.
Right.
And so we have been negotiating for some months with the Baillieu government to replace that enterprise agreement. So it's the timing of the enterprise agreement rather than the cycle of the term of government that dictates when we actually are negotiating.
Now, let me ask you this. Nurse-to-patient ratios is one of your claims, making sure that health assistants don't replace nurses, that you have no split or short shifts. I think those things would be widely accepted as beneficial for the patients, for the hospital system and for nurses as well. The 18.5% pay rise over 4 years, most people are going to think, well, that's pretty excessive. What's your response to that?
Well, we have an issue in Victoria where we are, many nurses are paid much less than their interstate counterparts.
How much less, Lisa?
Well, in essence, it's around that 18%, particularly with New South Wales. So, for example, we have the Albury...
18% less, so a fifth, almost a fifth less.
Well, yes, by the end of our agreement, if we didn't get 18% over 4 years, the 3 years and 8 month period, we would be, if our salary stayed the same and we didn't get anything, New South Wales salaries have already been determined up until 2013. So we know what their salaries are moving to. So we're trying to catch up and then keep pace. So our claim has got, we want more in the first pay, so we're looking at around 8% in the first 12 months, but then we're seeking 3.5% and 3.5% in the second, third and fourth years.
You'd feel pretty ripped off if you were a nurse in Wodonga and somebody was working in Albury. I mean, do they have trouble getting nurses in Wodonga?
No, they don't because of our nurse-patient ratios in Wodonga. But of course, New South Wales now have nurse-patient ratios. But you make nurse-patient ratios sound like a new thing. It sounds like it should have just been there from the word go, that there's so many patients to so many nurses and that's that. Yes, we've had nurse-patient ratios since 2000. It's not patients to nurses, and I'll just explain to you because I do think it's quite critical.
Okay.
If you have a surgical ward and your ratio is 1:4, that means if you have a 20-bed surgical ward, you must have 4 nurses as a baseline to look after those 20 patients. Now, one nurse might have 2 patients that are very sick. Mm. Another nurse might look after 6 patients, but between them, they've got 8. The 2 of them have got 8. So it's a baseline of how many nurses you must have. If you work in palliative care, for example, the ratio is different. So if you had that same 20-bed ward, but in a palliative care, you'd have to have 5 nurses on in the morning, and you'd have to have 4 nurses on in the afternoon.
Right.
But all of those nurses can take a different number of patients.
Let me ask you this. How do you think it's going to fall today?
Well, I'm going to be in conciliation trying to negotiate an outcome. Our legal team will be waiting. We haven't received the papers yet from Fair Work Australia or from the government or VHIA. So we're not clear about when the government's application will be heard, but we start negotiations at 10 a.m. We will be there at 10 a.m. and we will stay as long as it takes over as many days until we can reach a negotiated agreement, a fair agreement. we understand.
Well, we hope that both parties can come to an agreement today. Lisa Fitzpatrick, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Bye.
That was Lisa Fitzpatrick, the Branch Secretary of the Australian Nursing Federation. I'm Lawrence Mooney. You're listening to Melbourne Talk Radio, MTR 1377.